The smell reached him first, before the taste ever could. Burnt, earthy, sharp enough to catch in the throat. It was not a welcoming smell, not meant to comfort anyone. It carried the weight of something pulled from the ground, scorched on purpose, then left to simmer until it told the truth. Sterling stood still. His hand trembled as it held the wooden spoon above the bowl. The soup below was dark brown, thick, heavy, as if it did not want to be rushed. He hesitated. This was a man who had signed papers that moved cities, a man whose name had bent markets, a man who had silenced rooms without raising his voice. Yet now his fingers would not obey him. His body had recognized something his mind had buried long ago. He took a small sip. He swallowed, and something inside him gave way. The spoon slipped from his hand and struck the tile. Sterling's eyes widened, not in shock, in recognition. His breath locked in his chest. The sound that followed was not dignified. It was not controlled. It tore out of him in uneven waves. A raw sob carrying 50 years of restraint collapsing all at once. His knees failed him. He dropped to the diner floor, sobbing openly, his expensive suit pressed against stained tiles worn thin by ordinary lives. Outside, massive machines waited, engines low, patient, ready to erase the building without apology. Then a voice reached him from the kitchen, calm, gravelly, familiar in a way that hurt. "It's been a long time, Captain." Sterling lifted his head through tears and shaking breath. Behind the counter stood the old cook, steady, unmoved, his lips parted. The word barely survived the weight of memory. "Doc, they say you cannot taste a memory." But one spoonful just brought a powerful man to his knees. Before we uncover the secret ingredient, subscribe to join our journey of remembrance. 6 hours earlier. The diner was not quiet when Elias unlocked the door, but it was still his. The ground beneath his feet pulsed faintly, a distant pressure that traveled upward through the frame of the building. The windows rattled, once then settled. Elias paused with his hand on the door, letting the room reveal its mood. He had learned long ago that places spoke before people did. He moved behind the counter with a slight limp, familiar and unhurried. He filled a pot with water and set it on the stove. The flame caught cleanly. Obedient. He waited. Outside, heavy engines idled somewhere beyond the walls, not close enough to threaten, close enough to be felt. Elias reached for the roots, thick, knotted, rough-skinned. He washed them slowly, peeled them with care, and laid them on the cutting board. The knife rose and fell in a steady rhythm, each cut precise. Control still mattered here, even if nowhere else. As the roots roasted, the air began to change. Bitter at first, sharp, then deeper, fuller. Elias leaned slightly on the counter, listening to the pot begin to breathe. By mid-morning, the diner no longer trembled politely. The vibrations came in regular waves, now heavier and closer, traveling through the floor and into the legs of the tables. Dust drifted down from a corner of the ceiling and settled on an empty booth. Elias wiped it away and returned to the stove. He lowered the flame and stirred. Time could not be rushed without consequence. The door opened. Marcus stepped inside and closed it, halfway, muting the noise outside as if offering courtesy where none was required. His movements were precise, jacket smooth, shoes clean. He carried a folder under his arm. He approached the counter and placed a document down square and centered. "Emergency seizure," he said evenly. "Effective today." The paper lay between them. Elias did not turn around. The timeline's been clear. Marcus continued, his voice steady, practiced. Extensions expired. Appeals were reviewed. This is the final step. The building shook again, harder this time. A glass rattled near the edge of the counter. Elias caught it and set it upright without comment. Marcus glanced toward the stove. Steam rose steadily from the pot, carrying the smell of scorched roots and salt. "You're still cooking," he observed. Not mocking, just noting a detail that no longer altered the outcome. He opened the folder and slid another page forward. There are options listed: temporary relocation, assistance programs, partnerships. Elias tasted the broth. His brow tightened slightly, still bitter. Outside, an engine roared briefly, then settled. The sound pressed against the walls like a held breath. Elias lowered the flame and scraped the bottom of the pot with care. Then he spoke quietly to the fire. "Roots are born bitter," he said, "but fire makes them sweet. Nothing more." Marcus studied him not with anger but with mild curiosity, the way a man examines an old fixture scheduled for removal. "I hope you understand," Marcus said. "This isn't personal." Another tremor passed through the floor. Stronger. The walls answered with a low groan. Marcus closed the folder. "You have a little time," he added. "Not much, but enough to finish." He turned toward the door. Then the sound outside changed. Engines softened. Voices dropped. The pressure shifted. Marcus paused and looked through the front window. A black Rolls-Royce Phantom had pulled up to the curb. Polished. Still. Waiting. Marcus straightened his jacket. His tone adjusted when he spoke again. Still professional. More careful. "That will be all for now." He stepped outside. Elias watched the car through the glass. He did not move. He did not react. He rested his hand on the counter and listened to the soup continue its slow work. Something heavier than machines had arrived. The door opened again. This time the diner seemed to feel it. Sterling entered with a cane in his right hand, his posture stiff, irritated, as if his body were an inconvenience he refused to acknowledge. His suit was immaculate, sharp against the worn floor and faded booths. He coughed once, then again, the sound tight and dry, scraping its way out of his chest. David followed a step behind, alert, tense, already watching Sterling more than the room. Sterling did not look at Elias. He scanned the diner the way a man scans a delay, something small, temporary, and beneath consideration. "This won't take long," Sterling said. His voice was clipped, practiced. "Let's not pretend this is complicated." He reached into his jacket, removed a checkbook, tore out a page, and placed it on the counter. The paper lay flat, clean, almost bright against the scarred wood. "Fill in the number," he said, "and disappear." The words were not cruel. They were efficient. Elias did not touch the check. He poured coffee. The sound of liquid filling the cup was soft, steady, deliberate. He slid it across the counter and finally lifted his eyes. "Coffee's fresh," he said. "Strong." Sterling stared at the cup. Something in his expression tightened. Not anger exactly, but offense. This was not refusal. It was worse. It was disregard. "You misunderstand," Sterling said. "I'm not here for courtesy." Elias shrugged slightly. Still coffee. Sterling's fingers tightened around his cane. His breathing grew shallow. "Do you know who I am?" Elias met his eyes, calm and unblinking. "Man who hasn't eaten," he said. David shifted, unease creeping into his voice. "Sir, maybe we should." Sterling cut him off with a raised hand. "I don't need food. I need this finished." He turned toward the door, anger lending him momentum, or at least the illusion of it. Halfway there, his step faltered. The room tilted. Sterling reached for the counter, missed, and caught the back of a chair instead. His breath stuttered. A sudden cold sweat broke across his forehead and slid down his temple. David was at his side instantly. Sir, look at me." Sterling tried to straighten, but his legs did not respond. His cane slipped from his hand and struck the floor. "I'm fine," he said, but the words were thinner now, less certain. David glanced at his watch, then back at Sterling's face. Panic cracked through his composure. "You didn't eat. You skipped breakfast again. I warned you." Sterling shook his head faintly. "Get the car," he murmured. "We're leaving." He tried to take another step. His strength gave out. Sterling slumped heavily into the chair, his body folding inward, chest heaving as if the air itself had become unreliable. His suit pulled tight across his shoulders. His skin had gone pale beneath the sheen of sweat. David pulled out a glucose monitor, pricked Sterling's finger with practiced urgency. The device beeped. 51. David said, voice tight. "That's critical. You need sugar now." Sterling tried to wave him off, but his hand wouldn't lift properly. The room tilted. His vision narrowed at the edges, sounds muffling as if underwater. "No. Hospitals," he managed. David's hands shook as he searched his pockets. Empty. No glucose tabs, no candy, nothing. "Nearest pharmacy is 20 minutes. David said more to himself than Sterling. "Ambulance won't." Sterling's head drooped. His breathing slowed. Sterling closed his eyes. The room pressed in on him, sounds dulling at the edges. His hands trembled uselessly in his lap. Elias turned back to the stove. He lifted the ladle, filled a bowl with the dark soup, and carried it to the counter. Steam rose slowly, carrying the same burnt, earthy scent. He placed the bowl within Sterling's reach. "Eat," Elias said. "Ain't poison." Sterling opened his eyes and stared at the bowl. "I didn't ask for help," he said weakly. Elias leaned slightly on the counter. "Didn't say you did." Sterling tried to push himself upright and failed. His fingers curled against the chair, shaking. His mouth tasted metallic. His vision blurred. David looked at him, then at the bowl. His voice softened. "Please." Sterling's pride resisted longer than his body could. Slowly, unsteadily, he reached for the spoon. It rattled against the ceramic. He lifted it. His hand shook. He paused, then brought it to his lips. The taste reached him before thought. Burnt, earthy, bitter. Then beneath it something else surfaced. A warmth. A sweetness that did not belong to the present. Sterling swallowed. The spoon slipped from his fingers and clinked against the floor. His breath caught. Not in panic. In recognition. His shoulders sagged as if something heavy had finally been set down. Tears welled without force, spilling quietly, helplessly down his cheeks. His chest shook once then again, not with sobs, but with the effort of staying upright. David froze, unsure whether to move. Elias spoke from the kitchen, his voice steady and low. "Been a long time, Captain." Sterling lifted his head slowly. His eyes were unfocused now, looking past the diner, past the moment. Behind the counter stood the old cook. Sterling's lips parted. The word came out broken, barely there. "Doc," the air in the diner seemed to thin. A distant sound crept into the room, not from outside, but from somewhere far behind Sterling's eyes. A steady rhythm. Rain against leaves. the low, hollow echo of a world he had not visited in decades. The present began to loosen its grip, and the past started to answer. Rain replaced the hum of engines. Heavy, relentless, it drummed against leaves, soaked through fabric, pressed into skin, until there was no difference between the world and the body inside it. The air was thick, wet, filled with rot smoke and something sharper. Fear, the kind that never fully leaves. Vietnam, 1970. Sterling was no longer old. He was young again, lying in the mud beneath a canvas sheet that did nothing to keep the rain out. His uniform clung to him, soaked through, heavy with sweat and fever. His body burned, then shook, then burned again. Malaria, hunger, exhaustion. He could not tell which one was killing him faster. His vision swam, the jungle pressed in too close. Leaves brushed against his skin, as if the earth itself were watching. Somewhere in the distance, mortars thudded. Low, dull, not close enough to kill, close enough to promise they could. Sterling tried to speak. Nothing came out. His throat was raw, his lips cracked. Every breath felt borrowed. A shape moved beside him, Elias, younger, leaner, his face streaked with rain and dirt, eyes sharp despite the exhaustion carved into them. He knelt in the mud, hands disappeared into soaked earth, digging with urgency, with care. Sterling watched, barely conscious, as Elias pulled something free. Roots. Thick. Pale beneath the grime. "Don't move," Sir Elias said. The words were respectful. The tone was not a request. Elias crouched beneath a scrap of cover and struck a flame that fought the rain. The fire hissed as water dripped down. Steam rose in thin, bitter curls. The smell cut through the damp air. Burnt, sharp, unmistakable. Elias broke the roots apart. He chewed them slowly, deliberately, not casually, not carelessly, with purpose, with urgency, softening them because there was no other way. Sterling gagged weakly as Elias leaned in. "Easy," Elias said. "Just swallow." He fed him small portions. Patient, steady. One hand braced Sterling's jaw when it threatened to lock. The other guided the food in. It was not gentle, but it was careful. The care of someone keeping another man alive when there was no room for dignity, only survival. Sterling's throat closed against the first piece. His body convulsed, tried to reject it. He gagged, turned his head weakly. Elias's hand steadied his jaw. Firm, not cruel. "I know," Elias said quietly. "But if you don't eat, you don't walk out." Sterling's eyes watered, not from emotion, from the body's violent protest. The bitterness coated his tongue like ash, spread into his throat, his sinuses, his stomach cramped hard. "Breathe through your nose," Elias instructed. "Swallow fast, don't think." Sterling obeyed, not from courage, from the simple math that dying hurt worse than this. Another piece. His throat worked against it, then surrendered. Another. Elias watched his breathing, counted silently between each inhale. When Sterling's pupils began to track movement again, Elias allowed himself a small nod. "That's 3 days you just earned," Elias said. Sterling's cracked lips moved. The words came out raw, tastes, like hell. "Hell keeps you humble," Elias replied. Rain slid down his face. "Heaven can wait." The taste was awful, burnt, bitter, dry. Sterling's eyes filled with tears, not from emotion, from the effort of staying conscious. His body rebelled, then surrendered. He swallowed. Again. The roots settled in his stomach like a small, stubborn promise. Elias stayed close. Rain mixed with sweat and mud as it slid down his face. He watched Sterling's breathing, counted it, waited for it to steady. "Remember this taste," Sir Elias said quietly. Sterling barely nodded. The jungle tilted around him. "Remember it," Elias repeated. He leaned closer, his voice low, firm, unyielding. "Remember who fed you." The memory split open. Sterling gasped, sharp, sudden, like a man breaking the surface of deep water. The diner crashed back around him, the counter, the lights, the worn floor beneath his shoes. His head was bowed, sweat soaked through his collar. His hands shook where they rested on his knees. The spoon lay on the floor beside him, forgotten, abandoned sometime during the fall into memory. Sterling lifted his head slowly. Elias stood behind the counter, just as he had in the jungle. Older now, heavier with years, unchanged where it mattered. Sterling did not look surprised. He looked emptied. "I remembered," he whispered. His voice broke on the word. "I didn't want to, but I did." Elias met his gaze. He nodded once. "Eat the rest," he said softly. "There's still a way back." The soup steamed quietly between them, and the past, having made itself known, finally loosened its grip. Sterling did not remember standing. One moment he was seated, breath still uneven, the taste of the soup lingering like an echo. The next, he was on his feet, unsteady, but driven by something stronger than his weakness. He crossed the space between them without thinking, his cane forgotten where it leaned against the counter. He reached Elias and stopped short as if unsure what to do with his hands. Then he broke. Sterling pulled Elias into him, clumsy and desperate, his arms wrapping around the old medic, as if holding on were the only thing keeping him upright. His shoulders shook. The apology came out in pieces, tangled with breath and tears. "I should have found you," he said. "I should have remembered. I left you there. I left everything." Elias did not return the embrace at first. He stood still, letting the weight pass through him. Then slowly he placed one hand on Sterling's back. Firm, grounding, not forgiving yet, just present. Sterling pulled back, wiping at his face with the heel of his hand, embarrassed by the loss of control, and no longer caring. "I'm sorry," he said again, quieter now, "for all of it." The door opened. Marcus stepped back inside, tablet in hand, already mid-thought. He stopped when he saw them. Sterling turned sharply. "Stop it!" he shouted. The word tore through the diner, raw and unpolished. "Stop everything! Call off the crew! Nobody touches this building!" Outside, the engines continued to idle. Marcus did not move. He looked at Sterling with a calm that did not bend to volume. He unlocked the tablet and tapped the screen once, then again, as if patience were something he could afford. "Mr. Sterling," Marcus said evenly, "the board transferred operational authority to me 6 months ago, after the Riverside delay. You remember?" Sterling stared at him, disbelief flashing across his face. "That was temporary." Marcus angled the screen so Sterling could see it. "Clause 6.1, he said. "It's in writing. I report directly to the board now." "Not to you." The words landed harder than the engines outside. Sterling's mouth opened, then closed. He looked from the tablet to the diner, to Elias, to the walls that now felt thinner. "You can't," Sterling said. "I built this company." Marcus nodded slightly, and the company moved on. Sterling took a step forward. "Call them. Now." Marcus unlocked his tablet. After the Riverside delay, you signed Operational Independence Protocol 12C, Board Resolution, April 2024. He turned the screen. Sterling saw his own signature. It grants project managers final authority once demolition permits are active. Marcus continued. To prevent, quote, emotional interference from legacy stakeholders. Sterling stared. He'd signed it himself, written it even. A safeguard against sentiment slowing billion-dollar timelines. You can appeal to the board, Marcus added, but they're in closed session until Monday, and demolition is scheduled for noon today. Sterling's mouth went dry. He'd built the cage. Now he was inside it. The silence that followed was heavier than shouting. Sterling looked down at his hands. They were shaking again, but this time it was not his body failing him. It was something else, something older. The realization that power once given away does not return just because a man remembers who he used to be. He reached into his jacket and pulled out his checkbook. The sound of paper tearing was loud in the quiet room. Sterling wrote quickly, his handwriting uneven but determined. He tore the check free and held it out to Marcus. $5 million, he said. Personal, not the company. You delay this project for 2 weeks. Equipment failure. Weather. I don't care. Marcus glanced at the check. His expression did not change, but his eyes lingered just a moment longer than before. 2 weeks, Sterling repeated. That's all I'm asking? Marcus took the check. I'll classify it as an unforeseen mechanical issue, he said. 2 weeks. Marcus studied the check. His jaw tightened. I'll document this as a settlement payment, he said carefully, avoiding potential litigation over archaeological concerns. Sterling caught the phrasing. Marcus was covering himself. Smart. 2 weeks, Marcus repeated. I'll report hydraulic failure on the D11, equipment safety review required. That buys you until the board reconvenes. He folded the check, once slid it into his jacket's inner pocket. But when they send the next crew, Marcus added, this won't work twice. He tucked the check into his folder and turned toward the door. Outside, the engines powered down. The sudden quiet felt unreal. Marcus paused at the threshold. After that, he added, without looking back, the board will send another crew. The door closed behind him. Sterling stood there, breathing hard, the victory already sour in his mouth. He had bought time, nothing more. Elias leaned against the counter, watching him closely. Money buys time, Elias said. That's about it. Sterling nodded slowly. I know. He sank back into the chair, exhaustion crashing over him now that the adrenaline had burned out. He stared at the soup untouched since the memory. I thought if I came back, he said, voice low, if I fixed one thing, it would balance the rest. Elias shook his head. That ain't how it works. Sterling closed his eyes. The jungle flashed behind them. The rain, the roots, the debt he had carried without knowing its name. If you believe in cause and effect, Sterling said quietly, tell me what happens to a man who runs from what kept him alive. Elias did not answer right away. He turned the flame down and let the soup rest. If this story has stirred something in you, if you've seen how one choice echoes into another, share your thoughts. Not judgments. Just what you believe about cause and consequence. Elias finally spoke. He gets another chance, he said, if he's willing to pay for it the right way. Sterling opened his eyes, and for the first time since he had walked in, he understood that the real cost was still coming. The diner felt different once the engines outside went quiet. Not safe, just exposed. Sterling sat with his shoulders slumped, the adrenaline finally draining from his body. Buying time had felt like action, but it left a hollow behind. Elias watched him for a moment, then nodded toward the back. Come on, he said. There's something you need to see. Sterling pushed himself up and followed. The door to the basement opened with a tired creak, releasing cool, damp air. The steps were narrow and worn down the center, shaped by years of quiet use. Each one carried them farther from noise and closer to truth. The basement smelled of earth and old paper. Not rot. Preservation. Elias crossed to a shelf along the far wall and reached behind a stack of crates. He pulled out an old ammo box, olive drab, its edges scarred and rusted. The latch resisted, then snapped open. Inside lay a folded map, yellowed with age. Sterling recognized it immediately. "Geological survey," he said quietly. 1970. Elias unfolded it carefully, smoothing the creases with the same patience he used on the soup. Lines and markings spread across the paper, telling a story Sterling had spent decades avoiding. An aquifer, a historic burial ground, protected land. This whole block, Elias said, tapping the map, sits on it. Sterling's jaw tightened. That was never disclosed. No, Elias said. It was buried. Sterling looked closer now and saw his father's handwriting in the margins. Calculations, notes, decisions made in ink not erased by time. He knew, Sterling whispered. Elias nodded before the first foundation went down. Silence pressed in. Sterling traced one margin note with his finger. The ink had faded to brown, but the words cut clear. Aquifer depth 200 ft. Municipal dependency 60%, cannot risk. Below it, smaller. Burial site confirmed. Tribal council contacted. Agreement $50,000 annual. Silence purchased. Sterling's hand stopped. "He bought them off," he said, voice hollow. Elias nodded slowly. He did. Hated himself for it too. Sterling looked up. Then why not stop, just abandon the whole project? Because he'd already borrowed against it, Elias said. Investors lined up, contracts signed in blood near enough. Backing out would have ruined him. Elias tapped the map. So he built careful, left this corner alone, gave the diner to me as a buffer zone. Sterling exhaled slowly. A buffer between his conscience and his company. Between his son, Elias corrected quietly, and the man he feared you'd become. The words settled like dust. "He gave this to me," Elias said at last. Sterling looked up sharply. Why you, Elias, did not answer right away. He folded the map halfway, then stopped as if the paper itself demanded respect. He was afraid, Elias said, of what Sterling asked. Of what power does to a man, Elias replied. Especially to a son who's good at winning. Sterling swallowed. He told me straight, Elias continued. Said he built something he wasn't proud of, and he knew it. Said money had already taught him how easy it was to cross a line and call it progress. Elias met Sterling's eyes. He gave me this as an emergency brake, he said. Said if ambition ever ran too far ahead of your conscience, I was to pull it. Sterling exhaled slowly. So this map, this wasn't a secret. It was a safeguard, Elias said. For you. Sterling looked back at the paper. The aquifer, the burial ground, the truth his father had chosen to hide but not destroy. So if this comes out, Sterling said carefully, the tower dies. The stock crashes. Lawsuits follow. Everything he built on that lie collapses. Elias nodded. That tower, he said, that's the legacy of his greed. Sterling stiffened, and this Elias continued tapping the map. This is the legacy of his conscience. The distinction landed hard. Sterling closed his eyes. He saw the buildings bearing his family name, the speeches, the headlines, the way he had learned to confuse scale with significance. I spent my whole life trying to honor him, Sterling said, by building bigger, faster, louder. Elias shook his head slowly. He already did that part, he said. What he didn't finish was making it right. Sterling opened his eyes. And if I use this, he said, voice low, I destroy the company. Elias nodded. You destroy a lie. Sterling's hands clenched. And if I don't? He stopped himself, then finished quietly. I lose my soul. Elias said nothing. Sterling folded the map carefully, every crease deliberate now, and placed it back in the ammo box. He closed the lid, the latch clicking into place like a decision being sealed. My father didn't trust the system to stop me, Sterling said. He trusted you. Elias inclined his head. He trusted the bond. Sterling let out a breath he felt like he had been holding since the war. At some point, he said, a man has to decide which part of his inheritance he's willing to carry. Elias turned toward the stairs. Most men don't get handed the choice this clean. Sterling followed him up slowly. The diner waited at the top unchanged. The counter, the stove, the pot of soup that had pulled him back from the edge. Sterling looked around, seeing it now not as an obstacle but as a line he had crossed without noticing. I can't undo what I've done, he said. But I can choose what I stand on from here. Elias rested his hand on the counter. That's the work, he said. Sterling nodded. The key had been revealed, and for the first time he understood that using it would cost him everything he had been taught to value. Night settled over the diner without announcement. The neon sign outside flickered once, then steadied. Inside the room softened under the dim lights. Elias poured the tea slowly, both hands steady the stream thin and controlled. Sterling watched the cup fill the simple motion, holding his attention longer than it should have. They sat across from each other at the corner table. No rush. No noise pressing in. Sterling wrapped his hands around the cup. The warmth traveled into his fingers, then his palms. He breathed it in, as if reminding his body that it was still here. I don't sleep much anymore, he said quietly. When I do, it's shallow, like I'm afraid to go too far under. Elias nodded once. I built towers, Sterling continued. Glass and steel. Cities you can see from miles away. His mouth curved faintly without pride. And somehow I never figured out how to build a home. He stared into the tea. My wife left first, he said. She said I was always somewhere else. Not at work, not traveling, just gone. He paused. The kids followed. Not all at once, one by one. Missed calls, missed birthdays, promises I kept postponing. Elias listened. He did not interrupt. He did not fill the space. I told myself it was necessary, Sterling said. That sacrifice was the price of success. That one day they'd understand. His voice tightened. What I really did was teach them how to live without me. Elias lifted his cup and took a slow sip. Ambition don't like sharing, he said. It gets loud, pushes everything else out the room. Sterling nodded. Somewhere along the way, I stopped recognizing myself, he admitted. I got very good at winning and very bad at being present. He looked up, eyes tired rather than dramatic. I don't know when faith left me, or if I walked away from it. Elias reached into his jacket and placed an envelope on the table. The paper was thin, worn from being carried longer than it was meant to be. Sterling recognized it immediately. His breath caught. "That's his," he said. Elias nodded. "He asked me to give it to you when the time was right." Sterling opened the envelope carefully. The handwriting inside was unmistakable. The roots were bitter. "But they kept you alive. Don't forget the taste." Sterling closed his eyes for a long moment. "He always talked like that," he said quietly. "That wasn't poetry," Elias replied. "That was him telling the truth without dressing it up." Sterling folded the letter and held it in both hands. "He knew," he said. "He knew what this life could do to me, and he left you a reminder," Elias said. "Not to save the company, to save you." The diner creaked softly as the building settled into the night. Sterling set the letter down and leaned forward. His elbows rested on the table. His shoulders sagged. He brought both hands up and covered his face, not hiding, just given in to the weight he had been carrying for years. When he spoke, his voice was muffled, stripped of performance. "I don't know how to pray anymore," he said. Elias did not move. He lowered his head slightly and closed his eyes. Sterling stayed where he was, folded over the table, breath uneven. The silence stretched, not awkward, not empty. "God," Sterling said softly, "I don't know how I got so far away." He paused. "I chased things that made sense on paper, and I lost what mattered when nobody was looking." His shoulders trembled once, then again. "If there's still a way back," he whispered, "I need help finding it." Elias remained still, head bowed, eyes closed. He did not speak. He did not reach out. He simply stayed. The words settled into the room. They stayed there longer than Sterling expected. When Sterling finally lifted his head, his eyes were wet but steady. The fight had gone out of him. What remained was quieter. He sat back slowly, as if afraid of breaking whatever had just shifted. Elias opened his eyes. "Amen," he said. Sterling exhaled. He did not declare anything. He did not make a promise. He simply sat there holding the letter, the tea gone cold between them. After a while, he spoke again. "I don't know what comes next," he said. Elias nodded. Most honest place to start. Sterling looked around the diner, the counter, the stove, the worn floor that had seen more truth than most boardrooms ever would. For the first time in a long while, he said, "I'm not running ahead of myself." Elias allowed himself a small nod. That's usually when the real work begins. Elias looked past Sterling toward the photograph on the wall, two young men in jungle fatigues a lifetime ago. "I had a son once," Elias said quietly. "Marcus. Named him after my old sergeant." Sterling waited. "He enlisted young. Said he wanted to follow my path." Elias's voice roughened. "I told him to find his own. He did. Iraq, 2007. Sterling closed his eyes briefly. "I'm sorry." "He left a boy behind," Elias continued. "My grandson, Andre, never met him. His mama, she thought I'd done enough damage to one generation." The admission hung in the air. "Maybe she was right," Elias said. Sterling didn't argue. Some losses didn't have answers. Morning arrived without asking for permission. Sterling stood alone in the elevator, hands relaxed at his sides, watching the numbers climb. His breathing was even. The weakness that had followed him for days was gone, not because the stakes were smaller, but because the decision had already been made. He was not rehearsing arguments. He was not calculating escape routes. He was carrying a conclusion. The doors opened onto the boardroom. Glass steel and quiet expectation met him. The long table reflected faces trained to read markets before people. Conversations slowed, then stopped as Sterling walked to the head of the table and took his seat without asking. No cane, no cough. He waited until the room settled. "Let's begin," he said. A director cleared his throat. "This meeting wasn't scheduled." "I know," Sterling replied evenly. "That's why it matters." He placed a slim folder on the table and slid it forward. Not theatrically, precisely. "This is a geological survey from 1970, he said. "Commissioned before the first foundation was poured on the bunker site." Several directors leaned in despite themselves. "It documents a protected aquifer and a historic burial ground directly beneath the parcel slated for demolition." A murmur rippled through the room. "That report was never disclosed," someone said. Sterling nodded. "Correct. It was intentionally buried." The words settled like dust. "If demolition proceeds," Sterling continued, "the company violates federal environmental law and state historic preservation statutes. Retroactively." A director scoffed. "You're assuming regulators won't have to assume," Sterling cut in calmly. "I have certified copies. If the project continues, I will release them to the press and to the EPA. Today." Silence sharpened. "You'd destroy shareholder value," another director said. On principle, Sterling met his gaze. On inevitability. He leaned forward slightly. "Investigations trigger injunctions. Injunctions freeze development. Lawsuits follow. The stock doesn't dip. It collapses." The chairwoman folded her hands. "You're threatening the company." Sterling shook his head. "I'm describing outcomes." She studied him. "What do you want?" "Cancel the demolition," Sterling said. "Permanently." "That site is central to the tower's footprint," a director argued. "Redesign costs." "I've already run the numbers," Sterling said. "The redesign costs less than the penalties you'll face if this becomes public." He slid a second document across the table. "Architectural renderings, revised projections. You've always known the tower could bend," he added. "You just preferred that it didn't." A few eyes dropped to the papers. "And there's more," Sterling said. He paused, not for effect, but to let the room catch up. "The company will sell the diner known as the Bunker to me," he said, "for $1. A sharp laugh cut through the air. "You expect us to believe I expect you to recognize leverage," Sterling replied. "That diner is the trigger point. Owning it removes your liability." And in exchange, the chairwoman asked. Sterling did not hesitate. "I step down as chairman," he said. "Effective immediately." The room stilled. "I will transfer my voting shares into a blind trust," he continued. "Irrevocable. No operational control. No back channels." A director leaned back. "You keep the equity." "I keep the responsibility," Sterling replied. "You keep the power." The distinction landed. "You'd give up control," another voice said slowly, "to save a diner." Sterling shook his head. "To keep a promise." The chairwoman narrowed her eyes. "And what stops you from influencing the trust?" Sterling met her stare. "The same thing that stops me from running this company anymore. Transparency, oversight, terms you'll draft yourselves." The room fell quiet as the implications settled. "This is extortion," someone muttered. Sterling's voice did not rise. "This is governance correcting itself?" The chairwoman exchanged looks with the others. Calculations moved silently behind their eyes. Risk weighed against catastrophe, pride against survival. Finally, she spoke. "If we agree, you walk away today." Sterling nodded. "I know. No consulting role," she added. "I'm done advising," Sterling said. She held his gaze a moment longer. "Then we accept." Papers moved quickly after that. Lawyers were summoned, language tightened. When the final document reached Sterling, he signed without ceremony. It felt lighter than he expected. He gathered his folder, and walked out without looking back. Outside, the city moved as it always had. Sterling breathed it in, then let it go. Later, he returned to the diner. Elias looked up from the counter. No questions. Just presence. "It's finished," Sterling said. Elias nodded once. Sterling glanced around the room, the worn booths, the stove, the quiet resilience of a place that had outlived every prediction. I didn't save the company, Sterling said. I saved the truth. Elias set a cup down gently. That'll hold longer. Sterling sat not as a chairman, not as a savior, just as a man who had finally chosen where to stand. Outside plans were being redrawn. Inside, the work continued. Sterling did not remember standing. One moment, he was seated, breath still, uneven, the taste of the soup lingering like an echo. The next, he was on his feet, unsteady, but driven by something stronger than his weakness. He crossed the space between them without thinking, his cane forgotten where it leaned against the counter. He reached Elias and stopped short as if unsure what to do with his hands. Then he broke. Sterling pulled Elias into him, clumsy and desperate, his arms wrapping around the old medic, as if holding on were the only thing keeping him upright. His shoulders shook. The apology came out in pieces, tangled with breath and tears. I should have found you, he said. I should have remembered. I left you there. I left everything. Elias did not return the embrace at first. He stood still, letting the weight pass through him. Then slowly he placed one hand on Sterling's back. Firm, grounding, not forgiving yet, just present. Sterling pulled back, wiping at his face with the heel of his hand, embarrassed by the loss of control and no longer caring. I'm sorry, he said again, quieter now, for all of it. The door opened. Marcus stepped back inside, tablet in hand, already mid-thought. He stopped when he saw them. Sterling turned sharply. Stop it, he shouted. The word tore through the diner, raw and unpolished. Stop everything. Call off the crew. Nobody touches this building. Outside, the engines continued to idle. Marcus did not move. He looked at Sterling with a calm that did not bend to volume. He unlocked the tablet and tapped the screen once, then again, as if patience were something he could afford. Mr. Sterling, Marcus said evenly, the board transferred operational authority to me 6 months ago, after the Riverside delay. You remember? Sterling stared at him, disbelief flashing across his face. That was temporary. Marcus angled the screen so Sterling could see it. Clause 6.1, he said. It's in writing. I report directly to the board now. Not to you. The words landed harder than the engines outside. Sterling's mouth opened, then closed. He looked from the tablet to the diner, to Elias, to the walls that now felt thinner. You can't, Sterling said. I built this company. Marcus nodded slightly, and the company moved on. Sterling took a step forward. Call them. Now. Marcus unlocked his tablet. After the Riverside delay, you signed Operational Independence Protocol 12C, Board Resolution, April 2024. He turned the screen. Sterling saw his own signature. It grants project managers final authority once demolition permits are active. Marcus continued. To prevent, quote, emotional interference from legacy stakeholders. Sterling stared. He'd signed it himself, written it even. A safeguard against sentiment slowing billion-dollar timelines. You can appeal to the board, Marcus added, but they're in closed session until Monday, and demolition is scheduled for noon today. Sterling's mouth went dry. He'd built the cage. Now he was inside it. The silence that followed was heavier than shouting. Sterling looked down at his hands. They were shaking again, but this time it was not his body failing him. It was something else, something older. The realization that power once given away does not return just because a man remembers who he used to be. He reached into his jacket and pulled out his checkbook. The sound of paper tearing was loud in the quiet room. Sterling wrote quickly, his handwriting uneven but determined. He tore the check free and held it out to Marcus. $5 million, he said. Personal, not the company. You delay this project for 2 weeks. Equipment failure. Weather. I don't care. Marcus glanced at the check. His expression did not change, but his eyes lingered just a moment longer than before. 2 weeks, Sterling repeated. That's all I'm asking? Marcus took the check. "I'll classify it as an unforeseen mechanical issue," he said. 2 weeks. Marcus studied the check. His jaw tightened. "I'll document this as a settlement payment," he said carefully, avoiding potential litigation over archaeological concerns. Sterling caught the phrasing. Marcus was covering himself. Smart. 2 weeks, Marcus repeated. "I'll report hydraulic failure on the D11, equipment safety review required. That buys you until the board reconvenes." He folded the check, once slid it into his jacket's inner pocket. "But when they send the next crew," Marcus added, "this won't work twice." He tucked the check into his folder and turned toward the door. Outside, the engines powered down. The sudden quiet felt unreal. Marcus paused at the threshold. After that, he added, without looking back, "The board will send another crew." The door closed behind him. Sterling stood there, breathing hard, the victory already sour in his mouth. He had bought time, nothing more. Elias leaned against the counter, watching him closely. "Money buys time," Elias said. "That's about it." Sterling nodded slowly. "I know." He sank back into the chair, exhaustion crashing over him now that the adrenaline had burned out. He stared at the soup untouched since the memory. "I thought if I came back," he said, voice low, "if I fixed one thing, it would balance the rest." Elias shook his head. "That ain't how it works." Sterling closed his eyes. The jungle flashed behind them. The rain, the roots, the debt he had carried without knowing its name. "If you believe in cause and effect," Sterling said quietly, "tell me what happens to a man who runs from what kept him alive." Elias did not answer right away. He turned the flame down and let the soup rest. "If this story has stirred something in you, if you've seen how one choice echoes into another, share your thoughts. Not judgments. Just what you believe about cause and consequence." Elias finally spoke. "He gets another chance," he said, "if he's willing to pay for it the right way." Sterling opened his eyes, and for the first time since he had walked in, he understood that the real cost was still coming. 3 months later, the diner no longer smelled like paint. It smelled like food again. The windows were wide open, laughter spilling out onto the sidewalk. Every booth was full. People stood near the counter, cups in hand, leaning into conversations that had been paused for years and finally resumed. Old neighbors greeted one another by name. New faces listened, learning the rhythm of a place that refused to disappear quietly. Above the counter, the black and white photograph still hung in its place. No longer a relic, a witness. Elias moved through the room at his own pace, ladle in hand, shoulders relaxed. His limp was still there, but it did not slow him. He nodded to familiar faces, exchanged a few words here and there. Nothing dramatic, just presence. Andre stood near the register, taking orders, smiling easily now. He had learned the layout, the regulars, the small rituals that made the place run. He moved like someone who knew he belonged. Sterling watched from a table near the wall. He wore a simple jacket, no tie, no sense of occasion clinging to him. He held his cup with both hands, listening more than he spoke. People recognized him, of course. Some nodded. A few offered thanks. He accepted each one quietly, without deflection and without ownership. When Elias finally tapped a spoon against a glass, the room softened into attention. Sterling stood. He did not clear his throat. He did not raise his voice. "I'm not good at speeches," he said. "I spent most of my life letting buildings talk for me." A few smiles moved through the crowd. "I thought legacy was something you left behind," Sterling continued. "Something tall enough to cast a shadow." He paused, glancing around the room. Turns out it's something you show up for. Again and again. He lifted his glass slightly. To Elias, he said, "Who taught me that survival isn't about winning? It's about remembering who fed you when you couldn't stand on your own." The room answered with quiet agreement. Not applause. Something deeper. Sterling sat back down. Outside in the distance, the new tower rose into the skyline. Taller than the diner. Sleeker. But its footprint curved away, bending just enough to leave the small building untouched. It stood as proof that something had changed, not erased, not defeated, but acknowledged. Elias returned to the stove. The soup was ready. He filled 3 bowls and carried them to the counter, setting them down in front of Sterling and Andre. The steam rose slowly, carrying the same earthy scent that had once broken a man open and brought him back. Elias looked at Sterling. "The fire's done its work, Captain," he said. "The bitterness is gone. Now is the time to share the sweet." Sterling smiled, not wide but full. He took the spoon without hesitation this time. Andre watched him closely, then tasted his own bowl. "It's different than I imagined," Andre said. Elias nodded. "Most things that matter are." They ate in comfortable silence. Sterling glanced around the diner, the worn tables, the voices overlapping the photograph above the counter. He thought of everything he had lost, and everything that had been returned in a form he hadn't known to ask for. When the bowls were empty, Sterling set his spoon down carefully. "I'm glad I stayed," he said quietly. Elias met his eyes. "Me too." As the afternoon stretched on, people came and went, carrying with them more than food. They carried a sense of something restored, even if they couldn't name it. Before leaving, Sterling stood near the door for a moment, watching Andre laugh with a customer, watching Elias stir the pot, as if time itself had finally slowed to match his hands. If this story reminded you of someone you stood beside once, or someone who stood beside you when you couldn't stand alone, hold that memory gently. Share it if you feel moved to. Gratitude doesn't fade when it's spoken out loud. Sterling stepped outside. The diner behind him hummed with life. The tower in the distance caught the light. Neither needed to dominate the other. And that was the victory. Quiet. Enduring.